Thanks everyone for coming. We'll get started because it's a little after 2. So my name is Josh Morrison. I'm the treasurer for MNCO, but I am not the important one today. We'd like to welcome you on behalf of MNCO and of course Claiming Williams, and I'd like to thank all the people who put work into this effort, obviously the panelists for making their way out here in the remnants of a blizzard. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. The 4 people in front of you represent Williams throughout the ages. Over the last, starting in a graduate of 1958, the class of with Charles Dew. He graduated with a BA in history. He went on to attain a PhD in history at Johns Hopkins University and is currently the Ephraim Williams Professor of American History at Williams College, where he is both an amazing professor and a dedicated scholar. I can say that from personal experience. He is married with 2 kids and lives here in Williamstown. Catherine Hill was one of the first women to graduate from Williams College in 1976. Since then, she has been incredibly busy, earning an MA, master's, at Oxford and a PhD at Yale, both in economics. She currently lives in Poughkeepsie, New York, and is the current president of Vassar College. Caroline Fan is a member of the class of 2003, having graduated as a double major with degrees both in English and Asian studies. At Williams, she was very active in promoting the expansion of ethnic studies programs. She has since been very active in labor movements, having served as the associate director of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. She currently lives in New York, where she is director of development at the Workers Unite Film Festival. And finally, our most recent alum, Francesca Barrett, graduated back in so long ago in 2012 with a degree in biology. During that time, her senior year, I think, she was CC co-president, and she's also a member of Sankofa. She currently lives in Boston, Massachusetts, where she works at Boston Children's Hospital doing stem cell research. So this is basically just a little bit of a conversation. So if you guys kind of want to go down the line, if you don't mind starting and just kind of telling us a little bit more about yourself in between the degrees and the jobs. So if you want to start.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. I think this Claiming Williams idea is fantastic. I'm so honored to be on this panel speaking to all of you today. I hope everyone had a great Dead Week. And I want to also start out by saying I think the wisdom is in the room, right? This whole idea of Claiming Williams is really powerful because it says that everyone brings something to Williams. When I came to Williams from my public high school in the Midwest, no one really knew what Williams was. We didn't have water polo and stuff like that. So I was kind of intimidated to be here. But what I discovered was this really rich community, and I was really involved with student activism at Williams. One of the things that happened when I was here was 9/11, and that was very powerful, and then also the anti-war movement that happened after that. So it was at Williams where I found my political identity and I found my political voice. And so for the past 10 years, I've been an activist, I've been an organizer, I've worked for immigrant rights, for workers, on environmental justice, on pretty much any kind of progressive issue that you can think of. Worked with Congress members, worked in state houses, and went and got a master's at Baruch College of Public Administration. And one of the things I guess I'd like to say is, in all of this, I take with me the lessons that I learned when I was a student leader and a student activist. So all of those coalition meetings that you have, they do wind up and turn out to be useful at the end of the day. In the real world, right? Everyone kind of behaves not that differently than we do in college, actually.
I'm Charles Dew. I'm the old dude up here. I'm the guy with the class of '58 sign on his back, if you've looked at the program. My wife asked me as I was coming over here, how many people do you think will show up? And I said, I think we're lucky if we get 15 or 20. I feel like I should applaud you for turning out on this beautiful day and coming to listen to us. Williams was absolutely critical in my formative period as a human being, I think. I had not left my native South when I came here my first year. I had never been north of the Potomac. I grew up on the west coast of Florida, which doesn't sound too southern, except it was when I was growing up there. And it was a segregated society. It was the Jim Crow South. And my education, as I've said many times, began my first day at Williams when I walked into my entry, which was Williams F, and climbed the stairs and looked off to the side and saw that one of my classmates was an African-American student, an EF, just like me. And I had never experienced the incredible sort of freedom of operating outside the elaborate racial etiquette that governed the way white people and black people interacted in my native South. And to have a classmate, someone who became a friend, was just an amazing change for me, and began a process that I think probably ended up putting me here teaching Southern history. I became fascinated with my native South, not from the sort of glory and all of the Civil War stuff, but from trying to come to grips with how man's inhumanity to man could be expressed generation after generation in the region where I grew up, where my parents grew up, where my family lived. And so my quest was to try and understand the South. It is a mystery wrapped in an enigma to this day. I'm still trying to understand it. I'm still working on it. Every time I teach and interact with my classes, I learn things. As I try to pursue my own scholarship, I try to answer these questions that still haunt me. Slavery, racism, lynch mobs, all the things that sully the history of my native region. The South has produced greatness too. You only have to look at Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence to see this, or James Madison's Constitution of the United States. But it's been a very mixed legacy. So my quest was really to become a professional historian and try to come to grips with my native region. As the discussion goes on, I might say a word or two about the fraternities and my experience in that regard. If this is Williams through the ages, as I said before, I think I represent the medieval period, because the fraternities were still alive and well in my day, and we were an all-male place. And that, thank God, has changed dramatically. So maybe as we go along, I can reminisce a little bit about those days too.
Hi. So I guess I'm the newborn of the group. And I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me, and it's such an honor to be sitting next to these very impressive EFs. So I am from New York City, where I went to an all-girls private school that was mostly white and Jewish. So very sheltered for my entire life from a very kind of privileged background, you could say. And coming to Williams changed me as a person. It made me an ally. It gave me a voice. It developed my leadership skills and kind of honed in what I wanted to do with my life. And it started, again, on day one, but really evolved as I became student body co-president of college council, and kind of that year-long, heart-wrenching, difficult experience through various numbers of events. And the one that I'll be talking about today is the hate crime that occurred in the fall of 2012. But that kind of working with the strong administrators, the community, and seeing how you can have an honest conversation and move forward is something that I bring with me, and that speaks very deeply to my core, and that even imagining myself prior to senior year is very difficult, because there's been such a growth since I was 21. And it's something that I will be going to medical school next year, which I'm very excited about, but kind of long term, my hopes are to be in healthcare administration and policy making that would impact minority issues, women's issues, poverty, and various other broad aspects of healthcare.
Okay. I'm Cappy Hill, and in between graduate school and my current job as president of Vassar, I was actually here at Williams almost all of that time. I started I've managed to spend all of my life in academics one way or another, remaining a student. But I came to Williams in 1985 as a member of the economics department, and taught macro and international and development economics. I was very involved with the Center for Development Economics and was chair of that program for several years in the 90s. And I took a sabbatical in the mid-90s and lived for 3 years in Zambia, Lusaka, Zambia, and worked as a development economist, which was my specialty. Worked with the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank on economic development issues. I'm married, have 3 kids. They all went to Greylock, so I think of myself as a local. I'll talk a little bit when we come back to things that have affected us while we were here. I just want to mention my last 8 years have been spent at Vassar, and we've really been committed during that time period to increasing the diversity of the student body on campus, and I think we've succeeded wonderfully. One of the more recent initiatives that we've put in place is a program to bring veterans back to campus to start their BAs. And we had our first cohort enter this year, and we've just admitted our second group to start in the fall of this coming year. So I think I'll leave it at that.
So just a little thing to think about. So as we sit here on Claiming Williams Day, what exactly does it mean to claim Williams, and how has, as we see 50 years of history of Williams College, has that changed over the last 50 years? So I guess as people kind of further develop their narrative, just kind of look to see, has it stayed consistent? Has it changed as the college has diversified and expanded? So now a couple of you touched upon some important things that happened to you while you were at Williams. So could you elaborate so on a couple events, 1 or 2 events that maybe shaped your time at Williams and how that's kind of stayed with you through the present?
So when I was co-chair of Asia, shortly after the 2001 school year started, 9/11 happened. And this was, of course, a terrible kind of rift in our nation's culture and history, and just a huge psychic wound, right, for our country. And I think for those of us who weren't from New York, I'm not from New York, my husband who went to Williams, who's a class of '03, is from New York, right? It hit that much deeper and that much harder. And then for people who, didn't grow up in this country, because Williams has and continues to have many international students, there was a kind of secondary aftershock, if you will, particularly for students who were from South Asia, because there were things that happened both in the town and then in the gown relations, where I have friends who were afraid to leave their dorm rooms at night because they were afraid that they would face retribution for being Muslim or looking Muslim. And as co-chair of Asia, it was my responsibility to advocate for and to reach out to all Asian American students and to work with the Muslim Students Union. And it was very confusing, I think, for people, because one of the things that happened, and this is kind of how I became interested in policy and not just politics, is because of the very real daily impact that policies have on people's lives, right? So in addition to all the pain and suffering that happened because of 9/11, friends of mine, due to the Patriot Act, they had to go and report to the local INS office, which wasn't so local for us, really. The INS office was in Boston, and I had international students who were here who didn't have a lot of money, who had to pay to go to Boston and under a program called Special Registration, where men over the age of 18 from 42 countries had to report, and my friends felt like it was very wrong and discriminatory. And then I wound up working actually for my local congresswoman during winter study of 2003 on things like the Patriot Act. And so I was able to give them some, more information about how all of this happens, because we were dealing with our local Chicago INS office. And because I had taken Scott Wong's Asian American history class, it actually kind of eerily reminded me of some of the lead up to Japanese American internment, and thankfully it didn't go there, right? But it made a huge impression on me that politics and policy doesn't pass over the purple bubble, right? That there are very real life consequences to what happens at the national level. And part of that is why I decided to really push for ethnic studies. So that was one thing. And then another thing that happened when I was much younger at Williams, my freshman year was, and these are actually the words I'm going to pass along from my friends who were involved with Vista's struggle for Latino-Latina studies, is they said for all the students is to always try to recruit new generations and to keep in mind that change happens. It happens sometimes very slowly, but it happens, and to take heart in that, because one of the things that they found, right, was that they succeeded because they built a really broad coalition, and a coalition of not just people who they knew would be interested, but people who weren't necessarily the most likely allies. So I think those were two of the large things that happened that influenced kind of my perspective and worldview. And in terms of claiming Williams, I think, in Mako and in private conversations, we would sometimes talk about the burden of representation. And here's what I have to say about that. Williams is for all of us. It really, really is for all of us. And everyone brings something unique and special to the table. Everyone brings knowledge and experience and interest and enthusiasm. And I'm grateful to have gone here. I'm grateful for the education that I've received. I wasn't always perfectly happy, but I have a fantastic network of friends that I made here, and I really do appreciate the quality of the education.
I think probably the meaning of claiming Williams to me is the progress, remarkable change that it represents in the institution since I was a student here. As I mentioned, we were all male. The number of minority classmates and students at Williams was relatively small. When I look back at the way we were then and look out in this room now and look at it in my classes, I really feel good about what's happened at Williams. It's great to have been part of an era that you respected in many ways, and certainly the quality of the education that was offered here when I was a student was remarkably strong. That's one of the continuities, the liberal arts education that's the core of this institution, and it's the mission of the place, has remained firm. And it's only gotten better in my estimation because we've expanded the faculty, we've expanded the curriculum. But most importantly, we've expanded the student body. Bringing women to campus was the first of that critical variables, and diversifying the makeup of the student body has also been a task that the institution has committed itself to, and I can't tell you what a difference it makes in the sort of sense of spirit, culture, community on campus, and claiming Williams speaks to that to me. If you know the phrase white shoe institution, a white shoe institution, white bucks used to be worn by people back in my day in the 50s. White bucks were particularly worn by kids who went to prep school and ended up at Yale and Williams and places like this. I don't remember the last time I saw a pair of white bucks at Williams. It's been a long time, and that's a good change. I mentioned the fraternities, and I might just describe one thing that happened in that regard. Well, maybe two. I didn't think too much about the fraternity system when I was here because it was just a part of the campus. And if you were a student here, you wanted to join because that's where the social life was. My class, Class 58, was the first class that did not rush and join fraternities at the beginning of their freshman year. We were delayed until the beginning of our sophomore year. We didn't have a dining hall big enough for the entire class, so Baxter Hall had to be built to accommodate us. It's now gone. It's been replaced by Peresky. This meant that the JAs, think of this. You know what the JA system is and how important it is to you. The JAs were fraternity recruiters. They were put in the quad to pluck the best out of the class for their house. That's the way the system worked. Yeah, they did what they do now. They introduced us to Williams and developed some bad habits. But I mean, just think of that. That's a remarkable change. I joined a house. I enjoyed it. My senior year, I was the president of my house. And that was the moment that I really think I had this sort of burst of light on the way to Damascus about the fraternities. We had a system in place called total opportunity. I wonder if anybody in this room has ever heard that phrase before. Total opportunity was a way the fraternities had worked out a system to give everybody a bid, even if they passed all the way through the first rush without a single bid. The house presidents would gather around a table, and each one of us would agree that our house would take one of the leftovers. This sounds pretty harsh. Think about it. And we were participating in this, and I took one of the leftovers because the guys who we had pledged said, "This is a great guy. I can't understand why he was skipped." I remember going over to the Berkshire Quad to deliver his bid. And I knocked on the door, and he came to the door. And I told him we wanted him to join the house. I tried to explain that it was our fault that we hadn't seen what a great guy he was on the end. And I remember the smile on his face. It was a very knowing smile. I was going through my dance, and he recognized that for what it was. And I remember when I left that I said to myself, there's something wrong here. No Williams student should be put through what the student has just gone through. There's something not right. There's something that is cancerous at the core of the social life of this institution. That was confirmed to me when the national officers came through later in the year, and our fraternity president, who was from the South and knew I was from the South, drew me aside and wanted me to promise him that we would pledge no, he used the N-word, in our fraternity. And I remember being totally disgusted, and I turned on my heels and just walked away. And I thought in the aftermath of these two experiences that the time had come to change this institution here. And thank God the president, Jack Sawyer, and the trustees in the 1960s agreed with that. And as far as I know, we were the first institution of our caliber and quality to do this, to rid the campus of the fraternity system. And I think it's made us an infinitely better place. I really do. We still have class loyalty. We still have friends. We still root for our athletic teams. We just haven't folded that dimension of social exclusivity into the culture of the place the way it was. And just to anticipate a little bit my distinguished fellow Williams alum, Kathy Hill, getting the fraternities off campus before women came onto campus was really important, because it meant that when women arrived here, there wasn't that sort of body of resistance already in place that was going to fight this and make life difficult for the women who came here as the pioneers, who broke the gender barrier at Williams College. So I think we were very, very fortunate there. We had good leadership in Jack Sawyer. We had good leadership from the trustees. And I think that if you look at what was then, what's now, it's only better. In my way of thinking, almost infinitely better, except for that core of the liberal arts and the education that's available here. It was available to me then. I hope it's available to you now.
So for me, claiming Williams is such a wonderful day, in part because it's an intentional conversation that is mostly very hard to have. It is a hard, engaging time to be able to talk about identity or race or socioeconomic status. And kind of for me, one of the most defining experiences at Williams was when we had these conversations that sadly were non-intentional because of a perpetrator who wrote 4 disgusting words on the 4th floor of Prospect that then sparked what would become a beautiful student movement in which people were honest and engaged with each other and listened and sought to move forward within a community that there was misunderstanding about what students were experiencing on campus and outside of campus. And for many, it was a complete wake-up call that even racism was still occurring in our society, which isn't, you know, you can be mad that, or call those people ignorant, but it's not bad. That's the point of college in some ways, is to engage in those conversations and challenge yourself so that you learn, and then you can take that into the real world and be real world and be an ally regardless of what you look like or how you identify. So kind of the story of the hate crime was, it happened on the weekend of homecoming, and the administration acted as it had always acted by sending an email in the morning saying that a racial incident had occurred, and that later that evening students could come by and have support and a safe space to kind of heal. And as many of the students know, homecoming is a time when people drink and see alumni, and it's very merry. And under the surface, it was kind of dark and scary how this ugly event had happened when people were drinking and joyfully, ignorantly running around. And so I remember going to this event at Hardy House, I believe it was, at 7 with Dean Bolton and I think Ruth Harrison and Mike Reed, and there were alumni and students, and we started to talk about this racial incident. And slowly, as students understood what had actually happened, a lot of anger came out. And some of it was misdirected at administrators for how they had acted, and some of it was not misdirected, but there was a lot of anger. And I remember this alumni who stood up, and she announced herself as one of the first women of color at Williams, and she told us to get mad, and that we should not have a polite Williams conversation and over tea or whatever, but that we should get mad, and that we should use our anger and use that fire to do something about it. And she, at the point, suggested that we went to the police station, and that if we were unhappy with how the administration had acted, then we should involve the police station. We should engage them to try and figure out who had written those words. And so 100 of us, or 50 to 100 of us, went to the police station and circled it. And 2 very brave students went up to talk to police officers to kind of understand that this was a hate crime, to get them involved in the incident. While we were all kind of chanting at like 11 p.m. when, again, on homecoming, Saturday night of homecoming, people are drinking and going crazy, and here is this huge group of people, and it felt like a very important moment, and I knew at the time that what was happening then and what would follow in the next couple of days was going to be something that would stay with me. And I remember being on the phone with Dean Bolton and President Falk and a former CC president, while having a microphone in my other hand, trying to figure out how to have a conversation with these angry students about the community that we were in, with the administrators that so desperately wanted to help, and that in some ways didn't necessarily know some of the injustices that were going on campus because there hadn't been an honest conversation in that way between administrators about certain racial injustices or hates, discrimination that were currently going on. And so we had a really hard conversation that night and the next morning with students and administrators, and there was anger, and there was screaming, and there was fingers being pointed out in every direction. But what came out of it was a decision to cancel classes for one of the first times in Williams history to have an honest, full community conversation about what we wanted our community to look like, what we wanted, what students had experienced so that that kind of ignorance was not there, how we wanted to move forward. And at that point, it was mentioned that I was on Sankofa, and Sankofa is a Ghanaian word that means looking back in your history to move forward. And for me, it was really that kind of moment and what kind of the day looked like, that people were looking at what had happened in the past to themselves to try and improve upon Williams to move forward. And that day, I remember there was a march of 1,000 students, community members, administrators, President Falk, Dean Bolton, Mike Reed, Steve Klass, staff members, and we marched around campus and we stopped at various spots and read poems or sang songs about identity and about discrimination and wanting to end it. And it culminated in a huge Pareski lawn, and the entire lawn was covered with people who then listened to administrators speak, and students tell very heart-wrenching stories about discrimination. And one student I remember who was on the football team spoke, and after he spoke, the entire football team stood up in solidarity. And it was this beautiful moment that for many people that might, whatever view they have of the football team, it was a moment in which this entire team was standing in solidarity of their teammate and standing against what he had gone through. And then for the next 4 hours, we all went into Pareski and just let people talk, and let people talk about mental health, about race, about identity, about gender, about sexuality. And even what I also remember so vividly is that people talked about how they themselves had been prejudiced. People got up, and it was a safe space, but people got up and said, you know, I have discriminated against this group of people, and this is wrong, and I don't want to be like that anymore. And it was something that is so brave to do, and people might have been angry, but that realization is what that day was for me, that people either silently or just listening to over and over again a story of someone they might have seen on campus or that they might have seen smile that was having an internal struggle, hear what they had gone through and feel moved. And it felt like a movement, and it felt like a community, and it felt like for that frozen second that we could improve the community and that this type of instance would not happen again. And it's something that, you know, when I talk to alumni that were there in that room or in that march, it's something that they very vividly remember, that feeling of wanting to end injustice, even for that one person they saw of the 200 people that spoke on that day that they knew and that they had a personal connection with. And it continued to be a community movement. And even if Students Against Violence, whether it's continuing or not, I know that the work that the administrators did was just incredible, and that those type of honest discussions couldn't have happened probably in another place. And the fact that it did happen at Williams, which is a bubble, is unbelievable, because the next day, people were having hard conversations, and people were being negative, and people were mad at me, people were mad at Dean Bolton, people were mad at everyone, and people were mad that it was an event against the Black community that would cause such classes to be canceled. And at the time, I was really upset. I was very mad that not everyone agreed with me. But looking back, I'm happy that they were mad. I'm happy that there was still disagreement and that there was anger, because that's what drives you into what you want to do and what you're passionate about and what motivates you, in a way that regardless of what career you end up in, if you're always an ally, or if you have this kind of internal motivation that drives you forward, then you will be successful and you'll be able to make a difference. So that, for me, even though I'm going into medicine, that day, that year, that prior to having any of that happen, having been on Sankofa and seeing who are my family still, ended up reacting. Sankofa, for those that you don't know, is an African step dance team, so many of the members are of color, and seeing them cry and feel scared and all of these other things and talk about their specific instances is something that I will always hold with me.
Well, I think it's absolutely the case that our country and our society faces all kinds of amazing challenges going forward. All you have to do is, pick up the Times and take a look at it. And I think these kinds of experiences at schools like Williams are incredibly important, because it's going to mean that all of you are going to learn things that are going to help make a difference when you leave here and go out into the world. I thought I'd talk just briefly about two things. Charles mentioned I was second class of women here. I see at least one person here who was one of the early transfers in before the full entering classes of women. But I'm not going to actually talk too much about that. Just briefly, I actually think Williams did an amazingly good job of going co-ed, and as Charles mentioned, probably the most important decision was to get rid of the fraternities before that decision was made. And schools that have had more trouble moving towards true co-education have partly had that problem because they didn't make that hard decision about the fraternities before doing it. I also think it made a difference, the tradition at Williams of having students live together as freshmen made a difference, because while the two upper classes when I arrived were still all men with the exception of a few women transfers, the freshman class lived together and actually felt very cohesive and very co-ed, and we got to know each other extremely well, and for me it just seemed very natural. What I actually want to talk about is something a little bit more recent. I mentioned that I started my career at Williams in 1985. Williams has this wonderful tradition of choosing its administrators from the faculty. So Sarah Bolton's a member of the physics department, for example. I took over as provost in 1999 from the economics department, and there had been a tradition of economists serving as provosts at Williams. And one of the first decisions that we had to make at that time was to respond to an initiative that Princeton had undertaken. And Princeton announced that they were going to eliminate all loans in their financial aid packages. And Williams had to decide what to do in response to that. And it turned out we and other schools like us had been need blind for a very long time and were meeting full need. And we assumed that that meant that any student from any background could come to Williams because we were need blind and meeting full need. But if you actually asked somebody, well, what were we asking low-income kids to pay? The answer would be, well, we're meeting their full need. And you'd push them and you'd say, yeah, well, okay, but like, what are we asking a family that's making $20,000 or $30,000 to pay to come to Williams? And nobody knew the answer to that question. So the provost's office, actually with some help from a member of the economics department who sadly just passed away in December, Gordon Winston, we did the work to actually answer that question for Williams. And using financial aid data, we figured out what we were asking a family that made $20,000 or $30,000 a year to pay to come. What were we asking a family at the median income of $50,000? And then we also figured out how many kids we were getting from each of the income quintiles in the United States. So rather than just being able to say, well, we're need blind and we're meeting full need, we could say, how are we doing in terms of socioeconomic diversity? And it turned out that we weren't doing all that well, but it turned out that we were very representative of the other selective schools, because we went on, Gordon and I went on to, with others, look at how the other selective schools were doing, the Ivies and the Amherst, Wellesley. And it led to, I think, a renewed commitment on Williams' part to increase the socioeconomic diversity of the student body. There'd been earlier initiatives to increase the racial diversity of the student body, but there'd been really less specific focus on income and class. And I think Williams has made tremendous progress over the last 15 years with other schools as well on diversifying the student body in this particular area. And I think it's just incredibly important. For those of you who are studying economics, or if you're just reading the newspaper, you know that one of the major challenges in America today is the significant increase in income inequality. And our nation's commitment to economic and social mobility, I think, is really now more of a myth than a reality. And one of the major channels through which our country has always supported economic and social mobility has been through education. And it has to be schools like Williams that make a commitment to that, to make that really a reality in our society and not just a myth. So I'll leave it there.
Well, cool. Thanks so much. I definitely learned a lot from that specific question. Took it in a lot of good directions. So one more question for each of you. Do with it what you will. So if you were talking to your freshman self, the person who'd just been accepted into Williams College, who was walking down Spring Street for the first time, what advice would you give yourself? to prepare you for both Williams and afterwards?
I thought a lot about this, actually, and the advice I would give myself is to really try and make friends with different groups of people, right? Most of my friends from Williams are the sons and daughters of immigrants or immigrants themselves, and I think there's such a rich diversity in so many ways, not just, you know, cultural or socioeconomic, but of experience, of, you know, there are these cool people at Williams, and one of my, when I was in the Goodrich Co-op senior, one of the people who I didn't necessarily pick into the co-op with, but she, you know, was another group that picked in the co-op. She did this thing where she tried to go and have dinner with different groups of people who she thought were really cool, right? She'd always thought they were really cool. It was like towards the end of senior year, she had nothing left to lose but to go and invite them out to dinner and get to know them a little bit. And I always thought that was a really, really cool thing. And part of why I say that is Williams is a crucible, and I don't know that I would become a union organizer or worked on state-level immigration stuff or, you know, helped lead a political action committee that actually got 5 new Asian Americans in the House in 2012 and got the first Asian American female U.S. Senator in Mazie Hirono. If some of that hadn't been fueled by anger, right? So I think that, you know, anger, that youthful spirit and energy and drive is all really good and important. I also think it's really important to see things from other people's perspectives. You know, I spent 2008, 2009, Professor Du and I were talking about ALEC a little bit. I spent 2008, 2009 working on about 4,000 pieces of state-level legislation on immigration and workers' rights, fighting ALEC, which is a conservative network that pushes state-level bills. Last year, I happened to have the occasion to have dinner with someone who actually went through a leadership program. I happened to pick him to be part of the leadership program because I was a judge. He wasn't working at ALEC, and then he switched over, and it was kind of an awkward conversation, but because I wanted to talk to him as human to human, right? I tried to be respectful. I mean, there was definitely this kind of like blanching of my face where we found out he worked for ALEC, which promotes very anti-immigrant legislation. But he said, you know, I'm half Guatemalan, and then we talked about how bad DC has gotten, how fractious, how divided, and how people don't talk to people like people anymore, and how it used to be better once upon a time. And because of that, he told me things I don't think he would have told other people, and that was helpful. And the other half of the people who were at this dinner were Walmart employees. So given my tenure experience as a union organizer, as a progressive activist, it was kind of a weird dinner for me to be at, honest to God. But very enlightening, because these were just normal people, you know, they have families, they have their jobs. And 2 of the people who were at this dinner, one of whom worked for Walmart and one of whom worked for a different corporation, they actually were both ethnic studies activists. They came out of the Chicano studies movement. And they generally felt like this was the best way for them to kind of push what they'd always been fighting for, is to go inside the corporation and try to make improvements. And who's to say, right? Walmart is one of the biggest companies in the world, and if you can make certain changes at Walmart, whether it's on environmental stuff or other things, that you aren't making the world a better place in some way, shape, or form. Not a Walmart apologist, I would never be that, but really, really enlightening. So as I get older, right, and as I have occasion to meet people in various fields, I went to like a New York City Fashion Week launch party, totally different experience for me, but really cool, smart, fun people, and it made me really happy in a way that, you know, politics doesn't always make me happy. It's just to go and meet and talk to and try to make friends with, or at least understand the perspectives of other people. Because at the end of the day, it's about more than the partisan divide. It's about how we move this country forward, how we move our communities forward, however you define community. And on the policy side, right, just to note, one of the happiest days of my life was in 2011 when the Obama administration started dismantling special registration. right? And I knew that in some small way I had helped contribute to that. And also when he announced deferred action for dream-eligible students, because I have friends who are dreamers, and that was a day of pure, sheer happiness, and I was so happy I couldn't speak, right? So there's been a lot that I've done since Williams. I, look at Williams as a place that really helped to form me, form my opinions, form how I think about things. And the more that you can kind of diversify your thinking and challenge yourself, right? And how you think, not just in classes, but outside of classes, whether it's at the snack bar or, lifting weights. It's a really great, smart community of people who care, always, even when you leave.
I guess looking back, it's a good question, Josh. What would you give to yourself as something that would improve you if you were here? I think I would want to recognize the corrosive influence of silence. And by that I mean something that Professor Leslie Brown, who's sitting up top, and I ended up our winter study with just last month. Professor Brown and I team taught a winter study called The South in Black and White. It's the best winter study experience I've ever had. We had a great group of kids, and at the end, we were sort of wrapping things up. And one of the things that came up was how hard it is to speak up if you're in with your peers and somebody says something that offends you and is going to be offensive to others. And I wish I had had the guts when that happened and I was a student to say something, to say that offends me. I know it's hard to do. Nobody wants to sort of be the sore thumb that's sticking up in a social group. But I've come to this as an adult and really think it's important. And I say this as the father of a gay son. It's amazing how often you hear homophobic statements. And just after my son came out, I was worried about him. I was scared for him. There were all sorts of things I didn't know. But I found that if I listened to this and didn't say something, that I internalized the anger, and it ate away at me. And I finally said to myself, I'm not going to do that anymore. If somebody says something, they're going to hear from me. And I started to speak up. And I found, A, I felt better, and B, the people who had said something learned something in the process. So thinking back on my time here, I wish I'd had the guts to be a little different at those moments when people said stuff that I knew was hurtful and was going to be corrosive in the sense of the community that ties us together here. I wish I had had more guts to address that when I was a student.
I agree wholeheartedly, completely with what was already said. And to add something new, something I would tell myself is that I didn't need to be perfect or not express how I was actually feeling at any certain point to kind of add to what I see. I mean, I haven't been at Williams for a year and a half, but what I saw is a major problem of an idea of effortless perfection and mental health kind of eating away at a lot of students, and it just continues to reinforce itself over and over again when freshmen look up to seniors and see that they, in their minds, seem to have everything together. They can be amazing in academics and in sports and in clubs and have a significant other and just be popular and go out and all these things, that it's just not feasible at Williams, and it is not a true thing that you can be happy and be completely spread out thin. And I worked to try and gain that effortless perfection for a really long time up until my senior year, when I no longer wanted to BS, and I wanted to be very open about struggles that I had personally gone through. I wanted to have a conversation about mental health for my own and for many students' kind of personal afflictions. And I think that in some ways, as a culture of silence, that adds to it. the trying of hiding yourself or hiding your opinions or hiding what you're going through, and that being able to engage in an honest conversation, again, with people that are different than you, with people that have had different experiences and hardships, regardless of what that spectrum of hardship is really important and really helps you grow. And in the real world, again, no one expects you to be perfect, and it's all about work-life balance. And college is a really wonderful place to kind of grow and learn how to be that person and not be constantly stressed and upset, because at the end of the day, you should be doing something that makes yourself happy and not for an exterior appearance that you're trying to project out.
Yeah, when I look back, I have a similar thing, although it's slightly different, which is that I look back and I think I was intellectually conservative when I was here as a student. I wasn't willing to take some risks that after I got out, I wish I had done. And that includes one of the main things that goes on here is in the classroom with wonderful faculty. And I found a discipline that I loved, and I took a huge number of economics courses. But looking back, it was an opportunity where I could have explored the curriculum much more broadly than I did. And it was partly because I was a little afraid of not being able to do that well and doing it perfectly. So, I knew how to take a science or an econ or a math course and succeed. I wasn't quite sure what would happen if I took a studio art course or a course outside of my comfort zone. And I wish now that that was the opportunity to do that, and I wish I had taken advantage of it. So I would just encourage you to really take advantage of the incredible curriculum and faculty while you're here, and explore all the areas that are at your fingertips.
Well, can we get a round of applause for our amazing panelists? Once again, thank you guys for coming here and just being so willing to talk and to share and to show what Williams has meant for you when you were here and since you've left. So now we have some time. If anyone has questions, just raise your hand and ask. Or if no one has questions. Mike.
I don't have a question. I have a comment I'd like to share. And it follows on, one of Francesca's reminiscent about the event that actually led to this. And it was a story that people were telling in Peresky that it was actually all day. And one of the themes that emerged from that was people feeling as if they were visitors here. So the thing about claiming Williams came about from those individuals that felt like, despite the fact that they were students here and had earned the right to be here, that they couldn't claim, this institution as their own. And so while we look back and reflect on that incident and other incidents, there have been incidences for years before the incident in the sophomore quad with Berkshire quad. There was an incident in the freshman quad, and before there was a cross burning. And you can go back as far as this institution goes back and find incidences of people being marginalized, discriminated against, feeling as if they don't have a voice here. Before then, there was a group called Stand With Us, and Stand With Us actually led to claiming Williams. But it was not because people could claim Williams, it was because they could not claim Williams. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is that as we look back and we reminisce, that Williams still exists today, where lots of people cannot claim Williams College. And while we look back sort of fondly about the way that we responded to it and we addressed it and people had a voice and were able to step forward, I would just simply add that we have not addressed all of those issues, nor have we moved beyond those issues. So there's still work to be done at this institution today. There's still a lot of work for all of you all to do, because there are lots of people probably in this room that feel like they can't quite claim this place as their own. So one of the things that we say to people freshman year is that this is your institution, you own it, it belongs to you, you have every right to be here. So I would encourage you, to not look at this day just as one of celebration, but one of recommitment to make Williams the kind of institution that it could be, until all of you in this room can claim Williams and all of you can say that you're thriving. Then there's still work for all of us to do.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Yes.
My friends might read and Sarah Bolton might get really annoyed with me for saying this, but I want to go back to Francesca's point about getting mad. We have a culture of silence here. We also have a culture of politeness. I don't want to be the one to bring it up. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to get my feelings hurt. I don't want to cause any disruption. And so we see things that happen every day and we let them go. That's the culture of silence. And the culture of silence is in many ways more oppressive than, you know, somebody writing the N-word on the board because it's every day. The N-word will get everybody up and riled, but, you know, an insult in the classroom, an insensitive comment, you know, that's the stuff that we carry around every day. And I think that we talk about allies a lot. I think it's the role of an ally, even one-on-one, to step up and say to someone else, this isn't fair. And to not put it on either students of color or first gen or women or whatever as the ones insulted to step up, because they always have to step up. But a culture of silence really bothers me. It means that we don't like to have animated discussions in the classroom because, you know, if we get too excited, you know, I'm not sure what's going to happen. Heads are going to explode, or the building's going to fall down, or, you know, and we forget that when we leave that classroom, we go on to other things. So not letting animated discussions happen, not having hard discussions, not stopping when an insult or a microaggression happens. I think that's the real problem here. And so it goes along with effortless perfection, right? Nothing wrong here. You know, go down the street and look at the Amherst people. There's nothing going on here. Where underneath, there's kind of this little buzz of dissatisfaction and stress and fear that I think is damaging to students individually. It means that we carry these things, and you wonder about your own mental health. And then so I challenge people to step up and get mad. Because you don't get mad now in this safe place. You know, what are you going to do when something happens in your workplace? What are you going to do when something happens to you? This has ramifications for beyond. So, you know, this is a good place to practice getting mad, you know, so that you can figure out how to do it and how to push forward as change agents. Yeah, I push this a lot. We are Williams, you know, and as much as we may not like the arrogance of that, it means that other people look to our students here, faculty here, staff here, for leadership beyond the campus. And that means we have to be emotionally invested in it. It means we have to have emotions and not hide them.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry guys, it's hard for me to see you up there. Anyone else?
Yeah, Josh, one quick thing. I was wondering if any of the panelists or Mike, too, if you want to chime in, you could talk about the student takeover of Hopkins Hall. I thought it might be a cool part of Williams history that's very aligned with today.
It happened after my time.
And before mine.
There you go.
It happened before mine, too. I came in 71, and so some of my classmates were part of that. One of the things I will say about that, though, is if you look at some of the pictures, it almost looks like an us-them, because you see, you know, students of color hanging from the windows, and you see a lot of white students outside. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't know better, you'd think that it was an antagonistic kind of relationship, but in fact, it was just the opposite. You know, that the guys outside were actually supporting the guys in the building taking over. And so if you look at that, understanding that it was from the era of the 60s, and there was protests about the war in Vietnam, and there was a lot of collaboration, you know, and cohesion and support for that, even though you saw students of color hanging from, you know, the windows of Hopkins Hall. There was support from the whole campus for that. There's a lot of solidarity during that. So if you see that picture, that's what's going on, and it's not the white guys outside beating down the gates to try and get in and get the black guys out. That wasn't it at all. Very, very different spirit during that takeover among the whole student body.
Yeah, to that effect, we were planning on having someone who was directly involved in that, but partially because of the blizzard, things kind of didn't quite get together. Does anyone else? Sure.
So this might be actually a slightly provocative question, but it's directed at President Hill. So as someone who directly led the charge for eliminating loans as part of financial aid packages and really sort of championing socioeconomic diversity at the college, I don't know if you know this, but recently Williams actually reinstated loans as part of financial aid packages, and I was personally rather upset. My freshman year, I was told I would be basically grandfathered in, that I would never have to pay loans because they were a significant hardship. And then I found out my junior year that I did have loans suddenly, which was rather unexpected and unpleasant. But I do understand, obviously, that the college has its own financial necessities and realities. And so how do you, as president of Vassar, kind of try and tackle the necessities and the financial realities of college versus those financial realities of students?
Yeah, so the loan issue is an interesting one because everybody that graduates from Williams is going to be, and Vassar, is going to be in a fairly privileged position, and will have lots of opportunities to go off and have wonderful careers, and in the process of doing that, we'll probably end up at the top end of the income distribution, certainly in the top half. And so in some ways, expecting people to contribute to the cost of their education because of that, loan burdens seem okay. I think what we were really worried about was that for low-income families, the prospect of those loans would keep them from even thinking about applying and getting in the pool, and would push them towards schools where, in fact, the probability of their even graduating might be half, and the probability of their going on to great graduate schools would also be lower. So now my understanding is that Williams still has no loans for low-income families, and it's really for what people will talk about as being middle-income families, but in fact, it's really lower upper-income families who are being asked to contribute something through loans. And I think the evidence suggests that those families are in a better position to bear those costs, that it doesn't affect those families' decisions about where to go to school to the extent that it does for the very low-income families. And so in terms of use of resources and making commitments to financial aid, having loans for higher income families. There's students in the top 20% of the income distribution who get financial aid. I think it's okay for those families to have some loan burden to be able to go on to schools. So I think it's a question of making those decisions on the margin. Vassar has no loans for families under $60,000, but we weren't in a financial position to extend it higher up than that. And again, the evidence seems to suggest that those are the families that you'll scare away from coming to your school if you have a loan burden in the package.
Could I just add that change was a result of the financial collapse, 2008?
Right. That's what I was asking about, the balancing.
Yeah, and there were real concerns about the financial viability of the place. And if past is prologue, if students make their views known to the trustees listen. Talk to the college council leaders. Talk to the head of the steering committee. They meet with the trustees when they're on campus. President Falk's in the room. They're remarkably responsive. And if this is something that a lot of students think is important, raise it.
I also think that if you're making trade-offs on the margin, the more important thing would be to in our case, it was a question of how many financial aid kids could we have and how could we spread that money around. I think it's more important to have more, even if it means some at the top end of the income distribution are going to have a loan burden.
I don't want to take up more time. I'd be happy to talk to you about that.
There you go.
So while we have President Falk trapped here in this room, are there any other topics that anyone would like to raise?
When are your office hours?
If I can just say something really quick, something that I did do that I encourage students to do whenever I talk to folks in a college setting is to realize how financially privileged a place like Williams is. And I say this because when you go out in the real world and you go ask your city council member or your congressperson for funding for a project that you want to put together, they will likely laugh at you or politely nod you out the door and delay you for years. At Williams, if you have a project that you really want to do, you can generally get funding for it as long as you describe why you want it, and in a relatively short period of time. One of my friends, she wanted to start up a Korean drumming group. I don't know, those of you who are in Asia, if there's still Korean drums around somewhere, but basically, we then wound up with 4 or 5 Korean drums, huge drums, right? And she started it up. And one of my other friends was really involved with the Student Global AIDS movement, and they wanted to bring an intercollegiate conference to Williams. So they got the funding to do that. And it's incredibly empowering and important to be able to kind of like come up with these projects and launch them and do them and to get them funded. You don't really have that in the real world.
Anyone? Yes.
We talked about a lot of positive changes. I was wondering whether anyone found that Williams as an institution or students, as a student body or individually, has changed for the worse in any ways, and that maybe we should look back and learn from what we have done and change again.
I think that's a really good question, and I can think of one place that I would point to and say we've lost something. There was a real sense of identity and a sense of place with the fraternities. Your residential unit was cohesive, and you formed friendships on the basis of where you lived. We tried to recapture part of that with the neighborhood system. That didn't work so well. And I'm not sure what the solution is, but if I had to point to one element of residential life that I think we may have lost something, it would be in that identification with the place where you live and the people you live with over a period of multiple years here. That was the one good thing about fraternities. I think I can honestly say that. Everything else, not so much. But in that regard, there was something positive.
I'd add something that Francesca said as well, which is I think sometimes, and we create incentives for this in the way that we admit students, but I think students are doing so many things that sometimes you don't take the time to think really carefully and deeply about one of the things that you're really passionate about. So I would just encourage you to not be a type A with absolutely everything that you do, and give yourself a little downtime to think about the things that are really important to you, and to be able to devote time and effort to that, and not worry about doing a gazillion things every year.
Good advice.
Which you will ignore. But
Up until you graduate.
Yes, Sarah. Or do you want to?
I have a thought. I didn't go here, but I have a thought about something to be careful about. Y'all see me all the time. I'm attached to this device. You all are sometimes also attached to similar devices. So it's just the being careful about looking up and taking advantage of this moment. Our time here is short. Some of your time here is shorter than mine. I've been fortunate to be here for 17 years, but still, this is this day. You have each other. Sometimes you can put this right here and even turn off the ringer and take advantage of the moment with the community that's around you. I think that's something that we have to be careful about not losing. I'm not saying it's something that we've lost, but something to pay attention to.
I'll add to that a little literally, to put it down while you're walking in the snow, because I fell down a staircase a couple of days ago. So it can have large effects.
Could I pick up on that and give you a hope for the future? I have a family connection through my wife to Kenyon College in Ohio, and if anybody has ever been there, you know it's a beautiful campus, and there is a mile-long path that connects the two wings of the college. It's called Middle Path. And the students on their own initiative said, no electronic devices on Middle Path. We're just not going to do it. And they've done it. It's a self-enforced restriction. I hope when the new library is open and Sawyer turns into rubble, the existing Sawyer, that plaza that's going to connect Peresky and the library will be an electronic-free zone.
that's a great idea.
If students could do that, you would be amazed at the conversations you would have, at the friends you would make that you didn't know you could make. I really would love to see you do that. It should come from you. But there's an idea.
Anyone up in that balcony? President Falk?
If anyone else has anything to say, I just say one thing. First, I love that idea. I'm not sure, you know, if I got permission to like keep my job after like turning off the Wi-Fi in the new plaza. But I really like that idea. No, the only thing I was going to say was going to follow up on what a couple of people, in particular Sarah Bolton, have said. You know, I talked to a lot of students in their last few weeks here, and puts people in a reflective mood. And one of the questions I always ask is there anything you regret? And the single answer I hear more than any other answer when I ask that question at that time is people say to me, you know, there was a group of people I just met. And there were people, for whatever reason, because, you know, this wasn't my friends, or they were people who were interested in a certain thing, or they just didn't seem like I knew how to connect to them before, but I just connected and I have so little time. And why didn't I get to know these people months and years ago? Why did it take me so long to figure out to just look up, not only just from my device, but from everything that I do, and stop making this some crazy assumption about somebody because of the way they looked or who I thought they were? And people really feel sad about that. And you know, they should feel sad about that, right? Because this is an extraordinary opportunity. You're never going to be in an environment this intimate and this diverse and rich and interesting, again, unless you're so lucky that you get to work at a place like this. So, you know, if you think about that for a few minutes as you kind of come out of this environment where we're all committed to dialogue and talking and being together, and we're all fired up about our community, and we go back to tomorrow when we're in class, if we could carry one thing away from Claiming Williams that all of us can carry away, it's a commitment to not having that conversation with me or anybody else a month before graduation. And instead, just take full advantage of who is here and who is in this room right now. If everybody kind of looked around and found somebody they haven't met that looks interesting, and on the way out the door said, hi, I'd like to meet you, that'd be the best thing other than these terrific panelists that could come out of this hour together.
We should have had, yes.
I sat in this room when they were debating. I'm picking up a little bit on the idea of somewhat more subtle stereotypes. I sat in this room the day they were debating whether or not to admit women to Williams. And the faculty, the male faculty largely, were saying, oh yes, we need more people in music and art and so on. And one of my colleagues stood up and said, from where I'm standing, I can see only one woman in this room, and she's in the sciences. Let's not make snap judgments. And I'd like to also encourage people to avoid the kind of more subtle stereotypes where you assume that particular kinds of people are only interested in particular things.
You're here. Anyone, one or two more? Oh, Natalie, go for it.
Well, I guess this is a shameless plug for Miko, following on organizations. But so Miko is an umbrella organization and has 13 amazing subgroups that deal with identity, race, gender, all different kinds of things. And each week, each 13 subgroup has an open just group meeting. So if you could just go to the calendar and just show up to something that you would have never even considered, whether it's BSU or Vista or the QSU, just go and talk to people because they're more than willing to accept you, and you could probably find something that you love and challenge yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Another Minko plug?
No, I have a question for the panel.
Go for it.
In terms of, we spent a lot of today thinking about how to claim Williams as a space, and I might be just speaking to a small group of students of which I share the same sort of sentiment, but a lot of students who do a lot of different activities on campus, I get the sense that there's this anxiety that they want to do a lot on this campus to leave a legacy and to make the place better than when they came, but there's always this anxiety when they're getting ready to leave the door that, you know, they only have 4 years here, and the amount of work that they can do on campus is so limited, and the institutional memory at Williams is so short that sometimes like hearing some really great activities that used to be done and then 4 years later it's not here anymore is really sad and disheartening to hear about. So my question is sort of two-pronged. One is sort of how have you guys dealt with that? Sort of, and some of you guys are coming back to Williams, some of you guys have stayed at Williams, but looking into sort of the Williams culture. And then two, how have you taken your experiences more concretely? And despite, I don't know if you've gone into like more traditional sort of jobs or less traditional jobs, but how do you maintain that idea of being able to claim a space regardless of where you are? Regardless of the community, to have sort of a successful life and to thrive. That's sort of my brief point of challenge. Sorry.
I have a couple of responses. The first is, it's really hard to leave a legacy when you're a student, and it's really hard to think that 4 years is such a short time. But what we do have are these amazing faculty and administrators that are the institutional memory. And Dean Bolton, who is sitting in the back, and President Falk and Mike Reed, who is here, and even like I had lunch with Steve Class today, they're the people that continue and they think in 10-year spans, not in a 1-year span, a 2-year span, a 4-year span, and they hear you when you are mad, which again is a plug, get mad, find what you're mad at and be mad at it, and then keep that with you. But they hear it and they work on it, and it might take more student initiative to make it faster, to have more conversations, but it's slowly but surely working, and it takes more than a year, 2 years, or 4 years to really make a culture change. And so I think that if you're interested in kind of where the students that had graduated a couple years before you were, I think that they're wonderful resources for the institutional memory. But also, if it's something that you have a problem with on campus, people probably before have also had problems with. And so going to professors or the dean's office or whoever, even community members, staff members, there's just a deep institutional memory here for that. And then in terms of concrete, I mean, I am both a very traditional path person in that I was pre-med and I did research, and I am now currently doing biology research to then go to med school. It is very like cookie cutter type path. But I would say two things. One, for me, I also want to do business school to do an MD MBA, which is a little off the path, and I want to practice medicine, but long term I think kind of more broadly about the healthcare system, so there's ways to not be on that path. But in terms of how to claim my space at my current job, and I've only been there for a year and a half, and so you're an entry level position, and it's hard, and you feel like you are an entry level position, and working with respect, getting to know how the institution works. And right now I know we're going through a hiring process, and I remember talking to some people who are in charge of the hiring process who said some really upsetting things about how they hire people. One comment that was made was that they don't want to hire anyone that they can't pronounce their name. And I was in the room and I said, that is illegal and unacceptable. And it kind of just flew out of my mouth without repercussions. Because in some ways, because I was so used to kind of being angry and kind of saying things at Williams and like toning how to be a respectful anger and not to be disrespectful and not to go necessarily outside of what my realm is, but to speak intelligently and argumentatively in a positive way. And there was silence, and then there was a smile, and then there was, yeah, okay. And there was a real discussion about our hiring process and this is like a small hiring place, but there are opportunities if you hear something, as everyone on the panel said, to say that is unacceptable, or that is something that needs to change, or better not say that in front of me because now I heard it and now you have a problem.
I'd like to just flip it a little bit, and it seems to me the most important thing is for when students graduate from Williams, they've had a 4-year experience where they leave here and go make a difference in the world. And so you take what you learned while you were here and you have an impact on our country and our society and the world. And so I think what goes on during the 4 years that you're here, don't think too much about what the 4 years is necessarily going to be like for other students who come 5 or 10 years later, because their context is going to be different, their experiences, the world in which they're operating are going to be different. But the main thing that Williams stays focused on, and I think does amazingly well, I mean, each of us can think, you've just demonstrated it, and I can talk about classmates who have made a difference. Your experience here equips you to make a difference, and that's an incredibly important legacy of the institution.
I'm going to talk a little bit about institutional memory, and it's not always a terrible thing for there not to be a record of certain things, right? When I was here, I wrote a play, and then for ATP, I don't know if that still exists, Asian Theater Project, and then I had to star in the play, and there's no video recording of this. I'm a little bit regretful, but mostly very thankful. It can be a good thing. And then, you know, there's people like Marcella who I hope never leaves Williams because she's like, you know, my institutional memory, right? Don't put all the pressure on yourself. I put a lot of pressure on myself when I was here, right? And, you know, there are things you want to continue that, you know, if you can find people who want to continue them, then that's great. And if they don't, because they have other things they want to do with their lives that make them happier, then that's also great. And part of why I brought up New York Fashion Week, right, is like activism and leadership and all of this is sometimes very grueling and draining, and you have to have the things that lift your spirits too, right? So, you know, on the PATH thing, when I came, I was pre-med like most model minority Asian Americans. My husband came in as pre-med, and he is a doctor, but not the stereotypical doctor, right? I found a calling for activism when I was here. You know, I've been doing it for 10 years. What will the next 10 years of my life bring? I don't know. I might not be an activist as a professional activist all the time, but I think I've come to really appreciate the serendipity of life, right? And when you open up your heart to serendipity, the things that happen, the joyful surprises, right? The kind of setbacks even that will happen, take them all as lessons and try and take, you know, have takeaways from all of it and then move forward.
Well, I guess that'll wrap it up. One final thing is kind of as a little extension of this, we are going to be having dinner with this panelists in the faculty house tonight at 5:30. We have a couple extra spaces.
I'll be there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well,
everybody else has to go. I live here.
I'll be there.
Well, regardless, there should be.
It'll be the two of us eating together.
I'll be there as well. So, in the faculty house, there'll be good food, good conversation. So feel free to join us around 5:30. Space is limited, but show up if you want. And once again, thanks so much. This has been amazing. Thanks everyone for turning out. Thanks again.
Thank you.